And thank you to HR Milestone as well for giving us this opportunity to come back and share our experience and talk from the perspective of psychology as to how the current times are going to have an impact on who we are and how we can deal with that. So with that, thank you so much, everyone at HR Milestone and the committee out there for this opportunity given to us. We're going to talk about a topic which probably all of us have been some way or the other thinking about all this time, which is pertaining to how is this current scenario going to impact us? How is the current scenario going to help us in terms of dealing with it? And with all this perspective, if we look from that angle, yeah, a topic very well related and that we can relate with is how do we leverage our personality to serve through this times of COVID-19? And from that perspective, we're going to look at certain things like in terms of what is expected of us in current times, be it in our professional and personal lives. How do we what are expected behaviors? What are our responses to COVID-19? And at the same time, also look at personality from the context of 16PF, which is a very standardized tool, and how we can leverage onto who we are to deal with those various behaviors expected of us. And I'll be joined by my colleague Shruti on certain topics from within that. So when we look at this picture, I'm sure quite relatable for all of us. What our day looks like on an everyday basis, juggling from aspects of work, certain schedules that we kind of follow or we require to follow, be it in terms of workplace. It's probably no more remained a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 7 job, but it's a full-time thing that we are all working and some schedule that we try to pursue. Connecting with our teams back at workplace or trying to manage from home as well, where let's say both the parents are working, managing children as well. Also certain personal things that we want to accomplish that in all this time, try to remain healthy, exercise, etc. Connect with people from different spheres of our lives. Maybe a lot of us are taking this as an opportunity as well to connect with relatives, friends. Some of us are using this time to kind of collaborate with different people. And besides it, some of us are getting bugged bored probably as well. But in midst of it, COVID remains in the focus for all of us. And that's what the situation or day looks like for all of us. Important to see as to how or what our responses are in terms of dealing with this scenario. And I would encourage you to kind of sharing your probably responses, how you're dealing with this situation. I would encourage you to type in your responses into the chat box as to what do you think? How are you responding to this current scenario? And if you can share your thoughts into the chat box, that would be a really helpful thing. So would you like to type in, take a minute or half to just share your thoughts? How are you dealing with this entire situation at that point, or what are your responses to it? So if you can share your views onto the chat box at this point in time. Yes. Okay. Some people say that, okay, worried about the future. First response is shock, learning is a new normal way, work from home and reading books, exploring some sort of an uncertainty, so some new learning, interesting, and also being positive and making others positive, very powerful. Yeah, so being more self-aware, I think very, very important as we see that difficult to survive in the middle class, as some of you say, accepting and adapting, creatively trying to adopt new things, being more optimistic. Very nice. So thank you so much for your responses here. And if we can quickly look at what is it that can help us to deal with the situation. And if we look at a 3F response towards it, and I would request Shruti to help us go through it. Shruti, would you take it up as to how do we, if what a conventional versus a new age response would look like? So Shruti, over to you.
Thanks, Urvi. And I think I see most of them saying, let's learn new things. So first of all, namaste to everyone for the session. And while we go back, and I think I was reading through some of the responses while Urvi asked us, what are our response to this situation? And I think some of the things I could really relate with. What I would do quickly is to put it in a framework which will help us understand that if you go by psychology or behavior, whenever such crisis situations are presented, the old theory or the conventional responses that we see is first is flight, which means that maybe as a person I may choose not to confront the situation and may prefer to run away, avoid it, not really facing the situation, where the new response suggests that instead of that you face the situation, which would mean confront the situation and may have a self dialogue in terms of let me face it, let me see really that what can I really do, and let me ask myself what else may happen in the situation instead of running away from the situation. The second level of responses would be my fright, which was a very conventional approach, which was mainly in terms of getting numb, really don't know what am I really going to do with the situation. And generally the behavioral approach would be in terms of giving in, or like saying, okay, I failed, I really can't do about anything situation, I feel not in control. Where the new age response suggests that instead of fright, um, have fathom, which means that I adopt an analytical approach. I think, I take a deep dive into the situation, try to analyze the causes and see what's in my control and what more can I do to handle the situation better. The third was response generally we see people adopting in managing challenges is fight it out. So either being reactive to the situation could be in terms of I rebel, I go against it, I interrupt others, I don't show really openness to listen to others. Where the new age response suggests that instead of fighting it out, please suggested is to please adopt a facilitative approach to deal with such crisis or a challenging situation, which would mean that instead of being reactive, adopt a responsive situation, which would mean that listen to yourself or to others, communicate, seek clarity, and actually help each other to deal with the situation in a more positive and in a more, I would say, facilitating manner. So I think that's something we would suggest, that instead of going by conventional, let's look at the new age responses to deal with the COVID-19 situation. So while we say that, and as a topic of the, I think webinar suggests that, okay, then while we say that, what are some of the behaviors we may really expect this situation, and what are the expected we are expected to demonstrate to deal with the situation. And as we if we look at the next slide, what we are presenting to all of you is in Naman, we did a quick survey or a research in terms of when we look at the market scenario, what are some of the behaviors most of us are expected to demonstrate. So here is a list of 5 behaviors. What again we would request you is kindly read through this. We will discuss about it in detail in some time. However, just using the chat box, if you were to pick up any one behavior which you feel is most critical at this moment for you to demonstrate, or you feel the situation expects, us to demonstrate which one behavior would that be. So take a quickly half a second, and maybe you can just write the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, any one of the numbers in the chat box. Okay, 3. Okay, managing multiple priorities. Okay. Okay, now I see accountability coming up. 4, motivating self and others. Okay. 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 4. Okay. 3. All right. 3 and 4 both, Archana says. Okay. Okay, we stop on, we are actually stopping at 1. Okay, Gauri, thank you. Okay. So I think as what I'm seeing is most of us, if I were to say it's 2, 3, 4 coming up more often, 3 will be more practical. Thank you, Shakti. Omkar, okay, Omkar placement says 4. All right. So while we say that, thank you everyone for quick response. Now, what are we really going to talk about next is, if you really look at this 5 years, all 5 behaviors are really important, not only in the context of a professional life. What we see that while we are going through this situation, we see this has impacted our both 3 parts of self, which could be even at a professional level, our personal level, or even at a social level. So to kind of strike a balance and manage the situation in a much better manner, and kind of have a at a personal, professional, and social way we maintain ourselves well, we are suggest we what we believe is that there are 5 behaviors we will need to demonstrate and expected of us. And we'll talk about the first behavior, which is adherence to practices and norms. It could be in terms of adhering to professionals, because most of us are working remote, working from home. So one of the expected behavior is maybe we stick to our routine. We define a routine that, or the time of our breaks. It could be even at a family, including including your family members who decide on the discipline or the routine for the day. Also adhering to, let's say, or the government's rules and regulations, which they're talking about social distancing or the healthcare that conditions we are supposed to take care of. So that would really go with adhering to the practices and norms, which would really help us manage the situation well. Second thing, that while we adhere to the norms, I think second important thing which we feel is accountability of results using newer ways. While the situation has introduced us to the new normal, what has really not changed much is that each one of us are expected to deliver results, especially, let's say, even at a professional level. So while we do that, how do we really look for newer ways, not really coming up with new things, but existing things that we are doing, but look at the newer ways of meeting our desired results, our goal, and especially we were at the year end, the financial year end when all of this happened. So it's really the time where we all are closing our books, at the same time setting new goals. So how do we really set accountability and ownership for the things that we are doing, but at the same time look for newer ways of doing it, like we are doing today? Like most of us are connected to digital platforms. So that's like, I still continue to deliver results using newer ways. Look at the third behavior which talks about, I think, which got most votes, is about managing multiple priorities. Yes, it's something which is very important, I think, in this situation, and also given us a lot of self-insight in terms of how do we really optimize on the resources to ensure that we are managing multiple priorities at the same time, and sort of creating a win-win situation, even this in the context of giving time to your family, to yourself, to your organization, to your kids. So how are we really, what we can really do to manage those multiple priorities? While all of we do that, I think something, one of the two responses I saw to Uravi's question when she asked, how did I respond to this situation? And one person wrote in capital letters as shock. And I think, yes, that's something I think first reaction most of us might have had, because none of us really thought something of this could happen, experiencing lockdown, entire country, we are at home and doing so many things. But I think very essential is how do I keep myself and others motivated to look at the people, not really from the negative perspective, but look at the positive perspective and keep motivating self and others to live the day by day or maybe even look at next 3 months, 6 months time in a more positive way, help self and individuals to say, okay, what all I have and what more can I do to handle the situation well. And that's how we look for not really limiting factors, look at the opportunity the situation has brought to me. And going next is, I think, yes, social distancing is one of the norms that we are expected to demonstrate. But at the same time, how do we really ensure that we are still connected to each other? So moving from physical social distancing to which is the digital platform, to social proximity, where let's say today there are 53 of us who are on the same platform, and we will be interacting with each other. So while we say all these 5 behaviors we are expected to demonstrate, we all would agree that each individual is unique, and each individual will have his or own style to respond to the situation. They have their own approaches to deal with the situation. So today we are coming up what we say that if to leverage, how do I leverage my own personality, because that is something is in my control and I can really leverage on to deal or to demonstrate this behavior. So here we come up with 16PF is one of the oldest, widely used, I think very well-known psychometric assessment test. 16PF stands for 16 personality factors, and it's a standardized tool used across the world since last about 60 years. In Naman, we use it for various purposes, in be it in terms of leadership development, assessments, even for college students for career counseling, career development, also in the social context, for the marital counseling. These are the various platforms where 16 personality as a tool can be leveraged upon. And if I were to talk about the 16 factors, if you look at the table, these are the 16 personality factors this tool measures. And if you look at each factor in the tool is measured on a 10-point rating scale, and it's on a continuum. While we look at like low, average, high, there is nothing, when you talk about individual personality, there is nothing really right or wrong about it. What does the tool give information is, how am I as an individual when it comes to each of the factors, and how do I really express my warmth to others? How do I make decisions? What are my preferences when it comes to sharing my opinions and observations with others? Those are the various personality aspects it talks about. Each factor is measured on a 10-point rating scale, and it has got a left and a right meaning. What you also see on the screen is that while we talk about those 5 important behaviors, we have also analyzed and identified that out of the 16 factors, which will be those 8 to 10 factors which are likely to have critical impact on those 5 behavior demonstration. And Urvi will now take us through in understanding each of these factors and how these factors are likely to impact or help an individual demonstrate these behaviors. It could be in terms of either like it facilitates me to demonstrate these expected behaviors, or some of my personality traits might inhibit me from demonstrating the expected behaviors. And towards the end, we will see that if I were to leverage my personality, what are some of the actions I may like to take to ensure that I demonstrate these expected behaviors in the best possible manner. While Urvi takes in, I hope all of you might have received 16PF scorecard. May I see responses in the chat box? Have you all received a document of 16PF scorecard? Or what I can do is quickly, I'll share that onto the chat box. Okay, I have just shared. All right, I have just shared the file onto the chat box. What I would request is download it. And as Urvi will take us through understanding of some of the factors, what you all can do is actually mark yourself understanding the description where you stand, like which side of the scale you see yourself today. And let's try and understand now how this personality is likely to have an impact on the expected behavior demonstration. Urvi, to you now.
Sure. Thank you, Shruti. So let's look at each of these factors that or behaviors that Shruti talked about. And from within that, the first one being adherence to practices and norms. Shruti very well explained how it seems to play in current times, where we are required to either kind of not only adhere to norms of the workplace, where there are rules and regulations and systems, and especially at this time, every organization would have come up with some practices for remote working. Plus, at the same time, we have to deal at the social level in terms of, let's say, norms to deal with COVID, refraining from going out, etc., social distancing, vagera, vagera. So, on that context, if we look, there are four personality traits which talk about or which would contribute towards helping us be more adherent to these practices and norms. What I would request is that if you have been able to download that document, you can mark where do you think you fall onto this trait. And if not, probably you can still pen down on a piece of paper for each of the factor where do you think you fall onto it. And let's look at the first one, which is reasoning. And within reasoning on a continuum from left to right, if we look at the right meaning people, these are the people who like to think in detail. They go into depth of understanding something besides abstract as well. So how it aids them is that in the current scenario or otherwise, that helps them to analyze a situation in depth, help them to reason out why certain practices or processes are required, and on that basis, build more conviction to adhere to that system and processes. And that is what it helps them to do, which could facilitate in that context. Versus when we look at the left meaning, which is concrete thinking, these are the people who would be more driven by what they see, what they kind of experience, and based on that, it doesn't indicate that they may not follow the norms, but they might probably be driven by what goes around onto them. And if it's facilitating them, they may, or if they are not, they may probably consider not being so very adherent. In terms of second one, which is dominance towards the right, these are the people who like to assert themselves, who like to put forth their views and opinions, and in that context, they are able to influence others as well. And in that, the conviction that they may have, if they are onto the right on abstractedness, with that conviction, they may influence others as well in that direction. Now, that influence, when we look at the next factor, we'll see whether it is a positive influence or not so very facilitating influence. So that's what the right would help individual to do, versus the left on dominance would help an individual, or this kind of people would be more accommodated to others' views and opinions. So if there's someone who is more influential, and they would go by their views, or they would go by their opinions and submit to that. Now, if we look at the next factor, which is rule consciousness, the right meaning people, they strongly believe that certain rules and regulations are very, very important, good to follow, good to adhere, be it in terms of the practices of COVID-19 that the government asks us to adhere to, or it could be the workplace practices or something that is set for home as well. So they would strongly adhere to it and willingly follow it. And if they are again towards the right on dominance, they would influence others with that conviction as well if they are right on the reasoning. However, if the one is on the left, which is indicative of that these are the kind of people who believe in making their own rules, or they believe in following their own rules. And in that context, if it is in line with what the organization expects, that's great. However, if it is somewhere deviant, or if that's not otherwise, they may still probably unwillingly follow. Or if we see in the current times, there are a lot of people who are police has to work, like run around too. So these are the people who may probably fall into the left, or the organization may have to cajole them to kind of follow certain practices even while working from home. So if these are the left are the people, and if they are towards the right on dominance, they may influence and impact people on the other side also. And if we see some of the current happenings, let's say that happened at Bandra or that happened in Delhi, where the mob gathered and a whole lot of people were there, which was not in favor of what the current scenario was, probably could have been driven by someone who was towards the left on rule consciousness and right on dominance from that context. And if we look at the last factor, which is perfectionism, this talks about the right meaning people, like we looked at the rule consciousness. These people, besides driven by external rules, they have a strong belief system, they have a strong structure within themselves, and they are quite perfectionists in that context, and that will further facilitate them to adhere to the systems and processes themselves and with that willingness. Versus the left are the people who would go with the flow. If today if they see that things are okay and okay, there's more then no much numbers which have come up in which are detected being positive on COVID, they might probably go out explore, or maybe they may tomorrow when they see that something is probably critical, they might deconfine themselves. So it's more driven by the scenario around them again, and the impact they see around onto them. So that's how this four traits could have an impact on how one would be adherent to practices or norms, or may be less facilitating some of the traits, and towards the some element may be less facilitating. I would strongly recommend that probably keep marking yourselves onto that sheet of 16 PF if you've been able to download, or you can keep a tab while writing it by yourselves. And also maybe think through in terms of when it comes to adherence and the behavior related to it, how would you rate yourselves at this point in time on a 5-point scale, where maybe 1 would be not so very adherent versus 5 being adherent. I'm sure if we look at an ideal self, it would be 5, but be realistic about yourselves as well. Let's look at the next one, which is in terms of accountability, which Shruti already talked about, that in the current times as well, we are required to deliver results using newer ways and different ways and means by maintaining that ownership and accountability completely. As simple as that, if we look at this webinar or the session that we are in, which is one of the new ways to connect, which we might not have thought of otherwise, and we're still delivering, or today is the 18th session, so that's where the results delivery and the accountability comes in picture. So there are 3 factors which contribute towards it. Perfectionism, we talked about it in reference to adherence, and when we look at accountability and results in newer ways, people towards the right, they would be, it would help them to somewhere plan, prioritize, and organize themselves, go in a methodical, structured manner towards achieving those results or achieving the deliverables. Sometimes they may become at an extreme right, may become little rigid and less open to explore newer ways probably at times. So that could be a manifestation of an extreme right score on perfectionism. When we look at the left meaning of perfectionism, as we talked earlier, these are the people who would go with the flow. So for example, from work, someone receives a call that itna kar do yaar, work on to XYZ thing, or people at home demand something from them at that point in time, they may miss out on the track of things that they had to accomplish, versus they may go on what comes as and when the demands are posed onto them or what emerges for them. So sometimes it may impact the results from that context, but though they may be open to try out maybe a little different way of it. Rule consciousness, if we see the right meaning, this would be the lot of people who would even at this point in time, focus on the deliverables. They would focus on the quality. They would focus on the deadlines and strive towards achieving it because they feel responsible about it. They feel that that's what the organization or a situation demands from them, and that is what the right meaning would contribute or lead towards in terms of results and accountability, versus left could be in terms of being less at times focused on quality or deadline. They may still go what they feel is important rather than what the situation might demand from them. Looking to openness to change, I think a very important aspect at this point in time, finding newer ways and means and experimenting newer ways and means. The right meaning people would find out different options, different ways of doing things. So let's say, for example, I was talking to someone and doing some coaching session yesterday morning, and the individual said that being a manager, my team doesn't have the adequate resources. So they try to find out what are the ways and means to help the team to still accomplish the task with whatever minimal equipment or resources, but find other ways and means to do that as well. So that's what the right would help an individual to do. Find ways and means and different or newer ways to achieve results, versus the left meaning could be that they may still be more traditional. They may find it less comfortable to maybe divert or diverge to other ways. And so sometimes if the organization is adopting newer ways, for example, moving from face-to-face meeting, now it is more on Teams, or it is more on Zoom, or it's more on Skype, etc., they may feel discomfort towards it because that's how they are wired. So again, just reflect back on for your selves, where do you think you fall in terms of the traits? Be realistic as to who you are rather than who you think you should be. And also see the manifestation in terms of accountability and results and your ways. That might give you some insight about yourselves. And someone, as in the beginning said, the response of being self-aware, a very good time to reflect back to yourselves. Let's look at the next one, which is managing multiple priorities. I think needless to talk about it. All of us, like the picture shares, juggling between multiple things, working out things at home when there's no house help, or working out different things at workplace where there are multiple priorities emerging out there. Also, there are social demands also, though we are socially distanced physically, but still the demands of people around us, our friends or relatives, etc. And in that context, there are three factors which, based on our analysis, we felt would contribute. Reasoning, again, as we looked earlier, the right meaning are the people who would go into depth to identify and find the linkages between various pieces of information or different work patterns, and based on that, prioritize the work. They would be able to go into depth of planning. They would be able to go into detailing of it and see what is urgent and important, and probably prioritize based on that to achieve the outcome. Wherein the left meaning would be the people who, again, as I mentioned earlier, would be more in terms of go with what is stated, what is demanded at that point in time, and go with that perspective. Though it would help them based on the data to somewhere prioritize, but at times the depth from their own selves might be less at certain levels. Perfectionism, a very critical component that, or a trait that seems to be emerging for all the three factors thus far, in terms of right, again, being able to plan, prioritize, schedule different things for personal life, for maybe professional life, or for social needs. Maybe these are the people who will be able to work out that, okay, this time I set for my own self, be it in terms of exercising or certain routine that I would like to follow, so that one is able to accomplish that at the end of the day. Versus the left would be those people who would go with the flow, or they may go by others' priorities and sometimes may miss out in terms of what is critical or what's important. And if we look at root consciousness, we talked about it again from that context, strongly driven by what's demand from the external agencies or external stakeholders, be it at work, be it otherwise. Right would again adhere to the plan either that they have made or others have forced on as a demand from them, and meet and work towards meeting those demands, versus left would still go with the own needs or go with the perspective that they have set as a criteria rather than what others might have put as a need against that scenario for them. So think back, reflect, where do you see yourselves on this, I would say this behavior of managing multiple priorities. Let's look at to the next one. I think very, very important and highly needed as a factor at this point in time to keep oneself motivated and to keep others motivated. As we saw, some of us do feel that pressure, or some of us do feel that where is this going to take us, or where is it going to end? And in that times, motivating selves and motivating others, very, very critical. So the or the four traits which seem to contribute, apprehension being the first one. The left meaning indicates that these are the kind of people who believe in themselves, who believe that they will be able to sail through. They're quite optimistic, they're positive. At the same time, they have that trust and assurance about themselves. So these are the people who would be able to not just keep themselves motivated, but also keep others in that charge of high spirit or motivation. Wherein the left are the people who would be going through the going through the aspect of maybe self-doubt, kya hoga, kaise hoga, maybe nervousness or being worried about themselves, about their own abilities, and about the situation in general. So people with where their locus of control would be more external from that context. If we look at dominance, here again, as we looked at earlier, people from the right, and if they are self-assured, would be able to take charge of scenario, impact others, influence others, and influence with that positivity and optimism if they are self-assured from that context. And quite helpful in that context. So while I was talking to some of the other people in terms of coaching assignment, the managers, they talk that, oh, it's very, very critical for us at this point, not just that we be motivated, but keep our team members motivated. And that's where through different ways and means is how they're taking charge of the scenario and influencing team to remain positive and optimistic as well. And that's where I would see that some of them might be using right on dominance as I perceive. And the left would be the people who tend to be more influenced, who are more suggestible. So if they come in contact with people who are positively oriented or optimistic, they may get influenced that way. Or if they are more reflecting the right of apprehension, that is worried, they may get influenced in that context. So I think at this point in time, for all of us, very, very important that we showcase that positivity, and we may want to see which of our traits are helping us in doing that as well. Liveliness, people on the right come across as very energetic, enthusiastic, and cheerful. So even in these times, there would be people who are up and high in energy. They can bring that positivity. So that's again very helpful, be it as a manager, be it as a co-worker, be it as a family member, where when we see children around us who are confined to home, in home, and we have to come up with that energy and enthusiasm and keep them lively and cheerful. So the right on this would be a helpful trait that could help us. Versus the left, again, they would be quite focused and driven. However, they may come across as serious, and that's where, let's say, if someone is down or low, probably they may still remain focused for themselves. They may remain self-motivated, but in terms of motivating others, probably they might face some challenge, how it might look. And the last one, sensitivity. People towards the right may be touched by feelings and emotions of self, of others, and they may work with that empathy and work towards meeting others' need as well, is what a right meaning on sensitivity would look like. Versus the left, which would be more in terms of people who may go through an objective, logical approach towards things. There's nothing wrong about it, but maybe if we have to impact and influence people, some sort of empathy would be a helpful thing that could touch people at this point in time, or even keep ourselves in that spirit. Just take a moment again, reflect. Where do you think you are? How much do you seem to be motivating yourselves? How much you motivate others? Or which are those people around you who keep you motivated? I think it's a good idea also to be around people who motivate others, who are optimists, who are positive from that context. So yeah, a good, maybe a good part to reflect onto it and rate yourselves where you think you are onto it. Let's look at the last one, which I think we are all social beings, and very difficult for us to kind of physically disconnect from others. But that is what the situation demands from us. And from that context, while we may socially, personally distance, it is equally important that we remain in social proximity through e-connections. The varied methods, I think needless to say, we are all up for it. Maybe again, Teams, Skype, WhatsApp messages, calls, etc. And from that context, if we see the two skills that seem to have contributed towards it would be sensitivity. Again, from the right would be people who know what they need, people who know what others need, and that they respond and reciprocate from that perspective. That's what a right meaning would do. Versus a left would be that while they might be aware, they may still be more objective and logical in their approach over there. So that's what the left would contribute towards. And sometimes they may not feel that much need to connect with others, probably from that context of left on sensibility. If we look at self-reliance, this factor contributes towards people who are either group-oriented or self-reliant. And if we look at the left meaning, these are the people who come across and take initiative to collaborate, involve others, involve themselves on others. And especially, let's say, at workplace, these are the people who may take initiative to kind of connect with others, connect people with each other. And if I can just share a quick example from our organization, a couple of days back, and even these days, there are some individuals who kind of quickly put forth some sort of games and exercises which helps every one of us connect through WhatsApp group and messages. Now, that is what one would do in terms of motivating and keeping everyone engaged, but at the same time, bringing all the people together. And that's what I would see, that the person is more group oriented in that connotation. Versus the right meaning, they're more self-sufficient. They may not have a lot of need here to connect back with people, probably. And that's where, let's say, if someone approaches them, probably they might be okay and comfortable to respond, but their own initiative or e-social proximity probably could be low at times from that context. Reflect back, where do you think you are in terms of sensitivity and self-reliance? And how much initiative do you take for e-social proximity to connect you back with people? And just to quickly summarize for all of us, as we saw that there were a couple of traits which seem to reflect again and again, and this is what it showcases. So if we look at rule consciousness, a very important factor at this point in time, which would help us stay safe, stay adherent to various norms and practices, not only of COVID, but of workplace. Perfectionism from that context, again, help us be more structured, planned, methodical, prioritize varied things so that we are able to deliver what is expected at different fronts, be it social, personal, or at workplace. Dominance, important element that helps in terms of in terms of influencing others, and liveliness as well. Sensitivity, very critical, and I would not miss out on openness to change, because we'll have to constantly try out newer ways and means to deal with the current scenario of COVID-19 and the related behaviors that we expected to demonstrate. So yeah, this is in quick about all the behaviors and personality traits. I would request Shruti to quickly help us see in terms of what now, based on this understanding or awareness, how do we deal with it, or what can we do about it using this 3R model that we've come up with to help us sail through somewhere in terms of COVID-19. Over to you, Shruti.
Thanks a lot, Urvi, for taking us through how our personality, as you rightly mentioned on the slide, I think is internal to us. And while we spoke about those 5 behaviors, they are external to us. So how really we kind of amalgamate those, both the factors to help us respond to this current situation in a more confident, in a more self-assured, and a more conviction, with very high conviction, we approach the situation. So while we do that, and while we have some insight around how our personality influences our behavior demonstration, and as human being, each one of us bring in that unique element to the place we are, the time where we are in. So now, how do we, the next step is that now that I have that insight or the self-awareness, what is it that next I may like to do? Or what is it that I need to do in order to approach these behaviors or bring some of the changes or look at the things from a different perspective, so that I can help myself demonstrate these 5 behaviors which are expected of me to manage the COVID-19 situation in a better way. So the first approach we suggest is reflect. I think that's something we might have done now also, but good will be in terms of now that you have also marked or maybe have marked around those personality factors. Maybe take a time and reflect back and asking yourself, how do I see some of my personality traits uh, creating a facilitative or inhibiting impact on my behavior demonstration? And when I say facilitating, it would mean that I have a personality trait or an inner style or a preference which is giving me a natural advantage to demonstrate these expected behaviors. I would not say easily, but it comes naturally to me. And how can I um, really help myself do it more about it? And the second aspect would be, is there something within me which I may have to relook at or think from a perspective of, it is coming in my way of demonstrating these expected behaviors, and what is it that I need to do about it? So that will be the first step of self-reflection. When we move on to the next step will be to reveal, is to actually specifically identify some of the behaviors under the traits, that which one would you like to focus on. So let me give you one quick example. Let's say Ulvi spoke about, like, one of the traits that we see was creating a critical impact for, let's say, rule consciousness, when you look at all the other behaviors. So let's say if I look at my individual scores on rule consciousness, my score is 8 on the continent, which means that I'm somebody who prefers to do things by adhering to the norms and conforming to the norms which are stated by either my organization, my family, or the government, etc., etc. So that could be, if I were to analyze on some of the factors, it might be creating a facilitative impact, which could be in terms of when it comes to adhering to the norms, demonstrating ownership to deliver results, or it could be in terms of managing multiple priorities. But if I look at from the accountability perspective, sometimes the factor of 8 might also be creating an inhibiting impact by might be coming in my way of not letting me to look at the newer ways of doing things, and there I may at times face challenge. So that's something what I'm now doing to myself is I'm revealing and I'm thinking which behavior or a trait that I may like to focus on. So let's say I looked at, okay, rule consciousness, where on two things it is helping me, but maybe on one aspect it is creating an inhibiting impact. So that's where I bring focus to myself that, okay, this is something area that I may want to look on and do something about. And the third step then would be is to respond, which basically is I create an action plan for myself that how do I really leverage on some things which is giving me a natural advantage, but at the same time, are there any traits which is creating an inhibiting impact? What do I do to manage around it? So continuing with the same example, let's say when I look at my other trait, which is when I talk about perfectionism, my score stands 7 out of the 10, which also means that as an individual, I'm somebody who prefers to be more organized, systematic, and have some processes set within to get on with the things. So then what am I trying to do now is to, the factor which I've I've chose that to work on my rule consciousness to help me deliver my results by looking at the newer ways. I try and understand those newer ways. I create my own SOPs or processes to say, okay, till date I was following X steps to do a particular thing. Now I may look at the new steps. I create those for myself, for my own understanding. And that's where I ensure that I continue to deliver my results with full ownership, but with looking at the newer ways. So what I'm doing is in the given time, I'm leveraging on my one personality trait, which is perfectionism, while I'm managing on my other trait, which is rule consciousness, thus helping me demonstrate the expected behavior of delivering results with full accountability using newer ways. So my request to each one of you will be, do take time for yourself. This is the best time for us to have, though social distancing is a norm, but I think it will be really good for us to also have an experience of self-mirroring, do reflect, reveal, and respond to yourself, to leverage your personality to cope up with the COVID-19 situation and bring out the best in you. And while we say that, if we can move to the next slide, Uravi.
Yeah, sure.
You wanted to add something here at this time?
No, yeah. So I would say that maybe all of you who are present, take about a minute or a moment to identify for yourselves or mark onto your sheets. What do you see are the facilitating or inhibiting traits for you? What is it that is helping you, not working for you, and or a behavior that's helping or not working for you? And maybe is there something that you want to take away as one thing to work on based on what we have discussed today? So just take a moment to think through and at least identify maybe one thing to leverage on and one thing to maybe manage on based on what we have discussed. Just take a minute or a moment till we move to the last aspect, which is more about questions and answers. So before we go to responding to any of your questions, just take a minute to think about it, and then you can, if anyone has any questions, you can pose it onto the chat box, and we will be happy to respond to them.
Ravi, say thanks.